Welcome to Blood Death Knight's Beginner's Guide. Down below are some talent imports in case you want to follow along. Blood DK is a very versatile tank with excellent self-sustain and great control over enemies, but it has a lot of moving parts, so I want to help you learn all those moving parts. My name is Bowser the Healer, but today I'm Bowser the Tank, and let's get you into Blood Death Knight. Now, I always want to start these with a quick pros and cons so you kind of know what you're getting into, and as I said earlier, Blood Death Knight is a very self-sufficient tank. It does a lot of self-healing. A lot of the times the healers aren't going to be able to interact with you in a meaningful way, and therefore a lot of your life is in your own hands. But while that is a pro and a con, I think depending on how you look at it, what I think is the best part about that is from a learning perspective, you really get a hands-on as to what's getting you killed and what's keeping you alive. And I think that makes Blood extremely approachable compared to other tanks, because you're not going to be second guessing what part didn't keep you alive. You're going to be going, oh, I see that fell off, or ooh, it must have been a lot of magical damage. I can use this tool instead of that tool, etc., etc. The crowd control is incredible. Grip is an unbelievably strong move. And your mass grip, the one that'll have you talented into Gorfiend's Grasp, is actually a silence as well. So you'll mass grip all these enemies, silence them, interrupting any attacks that were going off that were interruptible. Really powerful at keeping the team alive and releasing a bit of the load from the healer, because you have so much control and it's so consistent and you're so responsible for your own health bar. It ends up working out that the healer has an easier time if you're doing your job correctly than with other tanks where maybe they have to occasionally help them. There are entire dungeons where the Blood Death Knight doesn't need to have to interact with the healer. Like the two of them barely work together because you've relieved so much pressure off of them. It's great. So those are sort of the W stuff, the things I really like about Blood Death Knight. On the con side of things, yes, you're self-sufficient, therefore your life is in your own hands, but also your defensives are weird. You have 2 tools in your kit that will mitigate damage by a percentage. You have 1 2-minute cooldown, and then when below 30% health, you sustain 35% less damage. So that is not a lot of damage reduction. That is something that you do have to factor into your survivability. However, you have the tools to manage that because the defensives do crazy things, like anti-magic shell is a magic only shield, but it'll prevent the application of magical effects. There are entire tank busters that don't do a thing to you because you have anti-magic shell. So while you lose some of the more traditional defensives, you gain some incredibly unique tools that no other tank has. Also, I need to get this out of the way. You're slow. You're really slow. And I guess the joke of this spec is that while you're slow and you only have 1 real movement ability, 2 if you talent into it, you grip enemies to you rather than, you run to them. So you ever see a brewmaster run around a room and pull all the enemies and teleport back? You won't be doing that. You're gonna kind of walk up, grip one, death caress another one, and kind of drop your death and decay and be like, oh boy, here they come. And it's comical, it's very funny, but also you do have to factor in the fact that you are unbelievably slow. Your positioning matters a little bit more, reacting to mechanics a little bit faster sometimes, but I think it's a pretty manageable amount of slowness. I think it's pretty doable. And if you play something like Worgen or High Mountain Torn, you can dash out of the way or sprint, makes your life a little bit easier. Now, I want to begin this section going through our basic defensive tools. I like to talk about defense and offense when I make these beginner tutorials. However, there's a lot of moving parts on Death Knight, and so as I go through your attacks, I want you to remember the defensive parts to them so that you can kind of take stock as to all the moves that do all the different things, and also really understanding how Death Knight stays alive and how it keeps itself safe is so important, because when one of these things aren't working, you're going to have to go figure out what it is that wasn't working. Starting with Death Strike and our mastery, and we are going to talk about stats here a little bit, but I don't want to overwhelm you. The stats are very easy to understand. Our mastery is called Blood Shield. Each time you heal yourself with Death Strike, you gain mastery percentage of the amount healed as a physical damage absorption shield, up to a maximum of 50% of your max health. You also increase your attack power by a certain version of that percentage of your mastery. Blood Shield is a lot of your mitigation, even if you don't go for high mastery in your stat weights. Death Strike is a very important part of your kit, and getting a percentage of that stops physical attacks and physical damage is a lot of what's keeping you alive. Now, this means auto attacks and anything that's tagged as physical, and if something is both magical and physical, it'll deal with the physical aspect of it, and the magical effect will still hit you straight in the face. Conversely, if you're immune to magical effects because of one of your defensives and there's a physical component, the physical component will likely still also hit your blood shield before it hits you in the face. Now, here's the best news about mastery and our stats in general. There might be a guide out there or somebody who's done deeper math than I have, but if you look at the logs, and this has been the past few expansions as well, as far as I can tell, Death Knight, or Blood Death Knight, excuse me, can run just about anything. All of these stats do something useful for you. Upon looking, I saw high crit, high haste builds. I saw some big mastery, big crit builds with some haste, no versatility. I saw somebody running like 2,400 versatility, and then like a little bit of every other stat. And they're clearing like 19s and 20s, so obviously they're getting away with it. So I think if you're coming from Unholy or Frost and you just want to run right in and start playing Blood, you can. Just throw your stats at it and start learning. But you might want to start focusing down on a specific setup at some point, following some other logs or other guides that you might read that have a more focused understanding of the stats. But I mean it kitchen sink. You can kind of throw whatever and get a lot of work done on Blood DK, and I don't know how suboptimal it really is, because you're going to do good damage and you're going to clear the content. Versatility is going to give you percentage damage increase, and half of that percentage will be a damage reduction. So taking less damage, great. Doing more damage, great. More death strike damage, more healing, what's not to love? We already talked about mastery. Haste is going to increase your attack speed and your runic generation. You do have some interactions with attack speed, but increasing your rune generation means you can spend more runes to get more resources, which means more death strikes. Critical strike chance doubles numbers, so you can get double damage, double healing. Who doesn't like big doubles? But the crit chance that you have on your armor will be converted into parry chance as well. This means that even with low amounts of crit, you'll still get a good amount of bonus parry chance, and that's a pretty big deal, as your dodge chance, your avoid chance, those are pretty low. Excuse me, just your dodge chance. Avoidance is a different stat. Your dodge chance is pretty low. You don't have a block, so parry is your lifeline in a lot of ways. And that actually brings us to the next thing to talk about, parry chance. Parry is just an effect that'll negate physical damage if you roll a parry chance. Now, let's just take a look at my character really quick. Parry, block, and dodge only happen on the front 180 degrees of your character. So anything happening behind your character will not be dodged or blocked or parried or whatever. So try not to take back shots in the middle of a dungeon. Make sure you're facing your enemies. But this can turn into a significant amount of damage. But if you have some small minion slapping you in the butt while you're trying to deal with bigger threats, it's okay, it won't get you killed. But it is important to know that, because the front side of you being where the parries are, parrying being so much of your mitigation, you just really want to make sure that you're lining up the enemies correctly and not taking a whole bunch of extra damage when you can avoid it. Also, because if you're brand new to Death Knight, you might not know what I'm talking about. Let me get some runic power really quick. If you've never seen Death Strike, I'll show it to you really quick before we go through all our buttons. But big Death Strike, right? You do this big overhead swing, and that will heal you for an amount based on the damage that it did. So Death Strike is one of your strongest single target attacks. It cleaves onto two other targets, and it heals you, and it's giving you that blood shield. So it's a very powerful move. It gets a lot done for you. You're going to hear me talking about it all the damn time. And while we go through the rest of these moves, I just want to know, I am going to go through all of these buttons individually. This is just to kind of recap the defensive points of the kit. So let's talk about the next one, Bone Shield. Bone Shield is given to you from Marrowrend primarily, and your Death's Caress, although your Dancing Rune Weapon will give you 5 of them, and your Reaper's Mark will give you 3 of them. So there are a couple of ways to get some extra Bone Shield charges, but Bone Shield gives you armor. With the way we talent, it gives you maximum health. It'll cap at 12 stacks, and you get a haste bonus while it's running, but more importantly, the armor you get. I'm getting 3,389 armor right now, and that is over half of my armor value, and I'm in plate gear. That is a lot of reduction on physical damage. So having a high Bone Shield count really helps. Now, it will fall off if you don't refresh it, so make sure to keep refreshing it throughout combat, and especially right at the end of combat. Sometimes it's nice though, if you run up to an enemy and you grip them, you'll also get a bone shard. So you can kind of like Bone Shield by gripping an enemy to keep the ball rolling if you, say, missed refreshing at the end of a pack. Auto attacks from enemies will reduce your Bone Shield count, but it does have an internal cooldown, so you don't just lose them all instantly. You're going to lose them kind of moment to moment when you're not parrying. It'll fall off, and you can rebuild with Marrowrend, or you can rebuild with Death's Caress. to make sure you keep it running. If you're around 7 or so stacks, I think it's time to probably start building them back up towards the double digits. However, it will fall off from time to time, but you'll notice if it hits 0, like if you lose your bone shield stacks, you're going to feel it immediately on a pull, just how much more it hurts. So keep that in mind. This is a very important part of your kit. So just always keep an eye on it. I like to track it with the cooldown manager. It's extraordinarily useful. Now for the next mitigation, I'm actually going to send myself over to Dornagal, and don't worry, this is a midnight tutorial. I'm not giving you the War Within stuff, but this is a really convenient place to take a very large amount of damage in front of a training dummy, and I actually really want that to talk about our next mechanic. Our next mechanic is called Blood Plague, primarily applied with our Blood Boil move, which is a short cooldown move with 2 charges that hits an AoE. However, your Death's Caress and a few other functions will put Blood Plague on targets. Blood Plague will heal you for an amount that it's doing. You heal more inside of your Death and Decay, which we're going to talk about later. And I really need you to see this. So just real quick, if you fall off of this tower in Dornagal, you'll always live. Let me remove this passive really quick. So, Blood Plague. Getting Blood Plague rolling on targets is important. You're going to do more damage to targets with Blood Plague. You can make them take more damage from Blood Plague by hitting them with Death Strikes. There's a lot of interactions here, but you'll notice I'm healing quite a lot from just standing here and letting it rip. This is really important as your Blood Plague is doing a lot of work for you in the background at all times. And this is without a whole lot of multipliers, right? I made sure to hit my Death Strike there so that they were doing additional damage, and so you can get a lot more healing, but you can apply multiple stacks. It's possible with any Dancing Rune Weapon procs or the major cooldown Dancing Rune Weapon to apply 3, 4, sometimes 5 Blood Plagues. And so it's very important that you remember this exists, you have them rolling. The more enemies being struck, the more healing you're getting. This is very useful, and I want to make sure you know about it. But here, I'll hit Dancing Rune Weapon, we'll apply a bazillion of them, I'll pop a self-healing buff, and you know what? Let me get a little bit of Death Strike in there. Look at how much that's passively healing me for right now. Right? That is really, really strong. And this is alongside your parry chance. This is alongside your blood shield windows and your Death Strike healing. It's doing a lot. And imagine, this is only 5 enemies. Imagine if we've pulled 12 mobs. Yeah, that's even more healing. So just, it scales really, really well with more enemies. It's a lot less good on one target, but you still get the benefits of doing extra damage to them. So there's no reason to not have your Blood Plagues running. So always try to get those rolling as often as possible. Thankfully, when we talk about this move, Blood Boil is like one of your best AoE threat pulls. Like, it gets enemies looking at you. It's great for starting a pull. So you're going to be hitting this all the damn time anyway. But I want you to know what that effect is, because it's going to pop up like a zillion more times. Now, to go over them really quickly, when it comes to defensives, and we're not going to talk about all the defensives, I want to talk about one thing that's really keeping you alive. You only have Icebound Fortitude for a damage reduction. This is a 30% damage reduction for 8 seconds. It's a 2-minute cooldown. While that is good, it's not like it's only a 2-minute, you know what I mean? Like, it's not Bark Skin where it's up every 32 seconds, 40 seconds. So the only other one is Will of the Necropolis. Damage taken below 30% health is reduced by 35%. This is a really big deal. It acts like a stopgap for your health bar, and it helps you survive. And then once every 2 minutes, you can get 10% reduced damage and have your Death Strike cost reduced by 10 runic power for 8 seconds. Blood Draw is also going to help you heal from other effects, and we have other things that are going to help us heal that you're going to hear all about. But I want to make sure this gets mentioned here. You do have something that kind of prevents you from dying. Also, you have Purgatory. This is a cheat death. Please never run without this talent. Like, you never want to leave Purgatory at home, as it is so common that you blow up because of a mistake. Like, if something extra gets pulled, or you had to overlap your defensives incorrectly because of something bad that happened and it kills you, well, now you're not dead. So you have to heal up the healing absorption that's on you for a few seconds when this procs. But it is a 4-minute cooldown. So you can die once every 4 minutes, which is really great for learning. But Purgatory lets you know you got to play a little bit safer for a bit. And when Purgatory's up, you can play a little more recklessly and kind of know that you have the backbone of Purgatory there to save you. One final note too is we're going to talk about Dancing Rune Weapon and Dance of Midnight, our Apex talent, later. But while you have a Dancing Rune Weapon up, you get 25% parry chance. This is on random procs of Dancing Rune Weapons from Dance of Midnight and the cooldown Dancing Rune Weapon. That extra parry chance is really useful because even if you're running a low crit build, you're still going to get quite a lot of parry out of this. And that's part of the reason why dancing Rune Weapon is a very useful part of your survivability in really large pulls, but it's also a damage cooldown and it's a bit complicated. We're going to be going all over this move and our major defensive in a little bit, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of what keeps you alive as a Death Knight. So now let's move into the meat and potatoes, that is the buttons. All right, let's start with our Death and Decay, as this is something that'll do multiple functions for you and it's very important. Death and Decay is a placeable AoE. When you drop it, targets inside of it will take damage. This also does a myriad of other things. It'll slow them by 90%, decaying by 10% every second. This is a really big deal for keeping you alive or keeping your teammates alive. Let's say they blow their cooldowns kind of early, they get threat. At least you can slow those enemies by 90% for a moment and kind of give yourself some breathing room while you set up. But in addition to this, you can get free procs of it that give you extra runic power and some healing. But my favorite part about it is Sanguine Ground. You deal 6% more damage and receive 5% more healing when standing in your Death and Decay. So if you want to keep one of these charges around for a rainy day and use the other one more offensively, go for it. I tend to use them very offensively, maybe stockpiling them for a bad day when things start to go wrong, but I want you to know how it works in full. Also, we're going to talk about Heart Strike in a moment, but your Heart Strike hits additional targets when in your Death and Decay, and you'll maintain any of those buffs from Death and Decay for 4 seconds when you leave. So this is an important move and I'm going to talk about it a bunch, so I do want you to know what it's doing, but it's very useful, kind of sets in place where you're going to be playing. This is also really nice for people who are, say, dropping blizzards or other ground targeted effects, because you'll kind of be saying, hey, I'm going to play around here. And that kind of lets your team know, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to be fighting in here. They know this is the relative spot that the tanking will take place, or that you're trying to set up shop and play in. So it's nice for a lot of reasons. Marrow Rend, we mentioned it earlier. This is a 2 runic cost move, so it's going to use these runes. By the way, runes cool down individually, so if I just use a few here real quick, you'll notice they have different timers based on when they were used. This makes them coming back a little bit smoother, but it's important to note that the way runes come back can be a little weird, so I just get used to that. But Marrow Rend gives you 2 stacks of your bone shield and does an okay amount of damage. You're not going to want to press Marrow Rend outside of building up your bone shield stacks or upkeep on them when they get a little low. There's another move, Death's Caress, that's a little bit better for just keeping up your bone shield charges if you're just trying to refresh the timer, but you will dip into Marrow Rend. So just try not to overuse this move. Try to use it to build and to keep them running, but not to overspend your runic power on Marrow Rend. Now, if you're playing my recommended build of Deathbringer, occasionally after hitting Reaper's Mark, you're going to, well, not occasionally, it'll happen eventually, but your Reaper's Mark will power up your Marrow Rend. If this button's glowing, you're about to send out a giant scythe that's going to hit one target really hard and then everything really hard. Super cool button. So if it's ever glowing, thumbs up, go press the button, enjoy Marrow Rend. Heart Strike is much more cost effective. This is a move that will do a good amount of damage. It strikes one additional target, it'll slow them down for a few seconds as well, and depending on the more enemies hit, you'll get more runic power. So if you want to increase it to 5 targets, you go drop your Death and Decay. Now your Heart Strike's hitting a whole bunch of targets nearby, and it's great at generating runic power for those Death Strikes. Heart Strike is your go-to. You're going to be pressing it a whole lot. If it ever powers up and it's glowing, that means that Dance of Midnight procced, and it's going to cost no runes and 150% increased damage, which is huge. If you're playing Sanlayan, it's going to turn into Vampiric Strike every once in a while. It's very important that you hit Vampiric Strike as often as possible when it pops up, Sanlayan players, just because it is going to provide you a massive buff that you want to keep rolling as long as possible. However, for the sake of learning, you see Vamp Strike on Sanlayan, you press it. If you see this button glowing in general at any time, you press it for Deathbringer. You're always pressing Heart Strike as your main source of like building up runic power and general AoE damage. Death Strike is going to technically do more damage in certain situations, but given that this is also your lifeline as a tank, it's a little risky, so we're not always pressing it for damage while we're maybe waiting for incoming damage. So Heart Strike's the one you're going to be pressing a whole lot. Get it somewhere nice and comfortable. All right, now Blood Boil. Blood Boil is a very powerful move that does a large amount of AoE damage and applies your Blood Plague. It's on a very short cooldown. You're going to want to use it very often and for good reason. First of all, it is just good damage. Here, let me set up shop really quick. It is good damage, but it doesn't cost anything other than its cooldown. This means that it's an extremely useful way to apply blood plagues and get some damage rolling, but not use any runic power or runes. You're going to find that there's a point where you do run out of runic power and runes. So if I just start spending all my runes here really quick, right, I have enough to Death Strike a few more times here, right? And then I can hit Heart Strike and another Heart Strike, and I'm kind of starting to run out of runes. You see what I mean? We're going to hit a point where I'm actually out. If you intersperse your blood boils and you try to never let this move sit on cooldown for very long, you're going to notice as I set shot back up one more time that I can kind of always keep it rolling and not really run out of my resources so long as I'm good about using my blood boils and at the right time and using them often. The more you intersperse these into your general rotation, the easier your life will be spending runes and gaining runic power. Everything is smoother because you stalled for a second to hit Blood Boil, and it's not like Blood Boil's doing bad damage, it's doing really good damage, so we always love having this move running and hitting enemies. When you start a pull, Blood Boil is going to be one of the most important parts to your kit, so I highly recommend using Blood Boil very frequently at the start of the pull to make sure the enemies are looking at you and not your teammates. You got a bunch of runic power, it's time to spend it. Death Strike heals you, it gives you the blood shield, we already went over this, so I don't want to retread too much. It will strike 2 additional targets though, which is quite nice, and Death Strike is your largest hitting move, and especially during Dancing Rune Weapon, all of the extra rune weapons you summon are going to follow up your attacks or do the attack you just did. So getting that many more extra Death Strikes out is a ton of damage. You're going to want to press Death Strike often for damage, but remember, there is this whole conservation thing where you need to make sure you don't greed too much. If you use all of your Death Strikes and you use up all your runic power, how long is it going to take you to build back up your runic power? That is the major balancing point of Death Knight, and thus, when you have a free moment, sometimes building up your runic power super high is a good way to kind of preserve your livelihood when the going gets rough or a tank buster's coming up. However, when the going is easy, you can't just send the Death Strikes. It will get you killed though. The laziness will get you killed. I think it's a part of the rite of passage, but just remember that the greed factor there is real. It's something you will need to balance. And before I get into the rest of the moves, just note that there's a lot of really good ways to practice Death Knight. My recommendations being Delves, of course, and if you just want to go to a Mycera on a Heroic or an M0 all on your own, the first 4 Berserkers are really hard to deal with. Like, extremely hard to deal with, and I think while you might die there without a lot of gear, it's a great way to kind of practice the start of Death Knight and using your cooldowns and really feeling out how to survive in a tough situation. So feel free to use that and Delves to the best of your abilities to kind of get a handle on how it works. Death's Caress is a 30-yard, 6-second cooldown move that costs 1 rune. It applies Blood Plague and it gives you 2 Bone Shield charges. This is a range grab. It's sort of like your ranged attack to let an enemy know, like, hey, I'm talking to you, and it'll get their attention. It's not a taunt, it just does a small amount of damage. But if you need something cheap that keeps your bone shields running, or in single target you want to reapply your blood plague and you for whatever reason don't have a blood boil around, this is a good way to do it. It's a nice move, keep it handy. It's not your most important move, and obviously it's not doing that much damage, but having a move at range that could just tag something and get them like noticing you can like grip an enemy, tag an enemy, grip an enemy, right? And like that's a good amount of control and getting things attention from far away. Now, speaking of getting things attentions, I want to talk about Dark Command. This is your taunt. Every tank's got one, but what you need to know, and it's in every tooltip now, is that when you taunt a target, you generate 800% threat for 6 seconds. This means that if you, let's say this is like the big scary enemy in a pack, I'm going to want to taunt them as I go into the pull, because all this extra damage I'm doing will generate more threat on that target, helping me keep my teammates safe, because maybe they're blowing all their cooldowns on this mob. I know that I can keep them nice and safe because I've generated a lot of extra threat. So sometimes when I'm fighting Doragosa, the final boss of Algathar Academy, I like to pull her into like the back of the room or like where the entrance is, so that we can kind of move around the room in a nice and orderly fashion. And I will taunt, and then I will hit Death's Caress. I'll drop a Death and Decay, and then I will grip as she gets closer, and then I might do one more Death's Caress before I run up. And this is just so that I can sit in a good comfy position and move the mob towards me while generating enough threat that hopefully my teammates aren't pulling off of me. But between the grips that also taunt the enemy and your taunt, you're going to have ways to do that. And yeah, we'll talk about grip in the utility section later, but grip also qualifies as a taunt, and if it can't move the target, it will still taunt the target. So that's an important one for you to remember. Now let's go over a basic rotation so that you know what you're doing before we talk about our major cooldowns. We have one defensive and offensive cooldown to talk about. Setting up on Blood DK is a little hard because if you have no bone shields, getting your bone shield up and getting your blood plague rolling is very, very important. However, if you're already set up and you have all your bone shield charges, you can run into a pull a lot easier. So let's go over both scenarios and then we'll talk basic rotation. To do a basic pull, I really like to start with a Death and Decay because it starts getting enemy like threat on everything. And of course, it allows them to be slowed so that it can take a second to walk up to them. Once I tag them, I like to hit a Death's Caress, taunt maybe the most important target, then hit some Blood Boils, and mix in some Marrow Rends between my Blood Boils. This is so that I start building stacks of Marrow Rend, or rather stacks of Bone Shield, so that I'm good to go. Once I have everything's attention from the Blood Boils and everything, I'll start to mash my Heart Strike more often and Death Strike to my Heart's Content. Now, sometimes Heart Strike is a good way to get some threat. So maybe you already have your stacks, you can run in Death and Decay, and then Blood Boil, Heart Strike, Death Strike, Heart Strike, right? This is a good way to do it too, because if you already have your bone shields, then you can just use the Heart Strikes to get that extra threat. And if you have to run and keep threat on enemies, Heart Strike hits 2 targets, so it's a nice way to kind of get some threat wall on the move. However, Blood Boil really is the best move for that. So if you're not set up, to recap, I like to drop in Death and Decay, Death's Caress, run up, Blood Boil, Marrow Rend, and just kind of try to get up towards 8 to 12 stacks before using my other moves. Once you're already rolling and you have everything and you want to start a pull, I recommend hitting a Death and Decay again, a Death's Caress, and then I'll usually Blood Boil twice in a row, then start hitting my Heart Strikes and my Death Strikes. Then consider using any of my cooldowns, right? And we're going to go over what all these moves do later, like the ice attack you just saw there. You might be like, what's going on there? Why are you dropping 2 Death and Decays? You can do that once you've set up shop and you start pressing your full rotation. Use your Death Strikes whenever you feel comfortable. Try not to overspend on it in case you need to live, and try to use your Heart Strikes to get as much damage as possible. And never neglect your Blood Boils for too long. They're going to do a lot of work for you. I'll keep dropping Death and Decays as I go as well whenever I have a free moment. And yeah, make sure your bone shield doesn't fall off. It's very important. It will fall off after 30 seconds. Yeah, keep spending your runes, keep spending your runic power, and try not to overcap on anything for too long. Now, I know that rotation sounds a little easy. Like, you just saw that footage, you heard me talk about it. Okay, well, I'm probably talking over it right now, but okay, is it really that hard? The trick is really in the greed factor. Keeping everything running, knowing what's healing you, knowing how long you have until the damage starts really racking up. Staying alive in an uncomfortable situation requires good, delicate use of your defensives and your self-healing, and making sure that you're using the right resources when you have them so that you don't overlap or waste them. That's where it gets a little tricky, is in the balancing act. But like I said, you're really going to feel it out when you play Death Knight. It's not something that's like kind of archaic. You're going to be like, ooh, I didn't have enough runic power there and I absolutely overspent my Death Strikes. Okay, problem solved. Ooh, I'm taking back shots when I absolutely shouldn't be. Yep, turn around, make sure you're aiming your enemies, make sure they're in front of you and not behind you, make sure your bone shields aren't falling off. And that's kind of where the delicate part of Death Knight comes in. But yeah, rotation-wise, it's actually rather simple, and I think that's one of the more fun elements to the spec. Now, we do have a few things to talk about before I can send you on your way to go learn, and what I do is I like to say like, hey, and from here you can go and play and learn, or you can stick around to learn a bunch of the extra stuff we're going to talk about. But there's 3 things you need to hear before you go and even mess around with these things, because they're super duper important. Let's start with Dancing Rune Weapon. We're also going to talk a little bit about our Apex talents here, but when you pop Dancing Rune Weapon, it's a 1.5 minute cooldown, and for older DK players, it no longer cools itself down, so it's just a straight 1.5 minute cooldown. For the next 12 seconds, you're going to summon 2 runic weapons, the tooltip isn't completely correct here, that will mimic your melee attacks and bolster your defensives. They give you an extra 25% parry chance, and each dancing weapon is going to increase your damage by 6% and damage reduced by 4% from that rank 2 of Dance of Midnight. The parry chance is static, by the way. I believe it's only 25% no matter how many dancing rune weapons are out. It's going to give you 5 bone shield charges as well. Dancing Rune Weapon really does mimic your attacks though, so you get these extra weapons that come out, and then, yeah, you hit Marrow Rend, all of your weapons Marrow Rend. You hit Heart Strike, all of your weapons Heart Strike. You hit Death Strike, you guessed it, they all Death Strike. This is what makes it such a powerful offensive and defensive cooldown. And you might have noticed, I just got 1,000,000 blood plagues on my targets. That's because I had Dancing Rune Weapons active. If you get a Dancing Rune Weapon proc while your Dancing Rune Weapon cooldown is running, you can get 4 and even 5 blood plagues on a target, which is extremely helpful. This begs the question, do you use this for damage or for defense? Well, the simple answer is that you can use it for both. When you're new, I think Dancing Rune Weapon is a great way to kind of get the party started. You'll lose a little bit of damage using it just to set up, but 5 Bone Shield charges and all those blood plagues and all that Death Strike healing is so useful. Even if it's only active for 12 seconds, you gain all these resources that will be used for quite a time afterwards, so it's not like the 12 seconds was poorly used. However, if you can survive the start of a pull, using Dancing Rune Weapon once everything's set up and looking good is a great way to get the maximum amount of damage out of it. So feel free to spend a defensive to get set up and then use your Dancing Rune Weapon, or maybe slow enemies down after you get threat on them and grab the rest of your enemies you need, and then once they're all gathered up, hit Dancing Rune Weapon and go to town. It's a very fun cooldown, but it does come with that risk factor. It also costs a global cooldown, which is maybe my least favorite feature of it. It's one of those moves that I really wish was not global cooldown bound. So when you press it, you will be 1 GCD away from being able to take an action. So just remember that if you're trying to live, it might be better to Death Strike then hit Dancing Rune Weapon, rather than hit Dancing Rune Weapon and potentially die on your way to hitting Death Strike, but that's a niche application. Your major defensive is called Vampiric Blood. This is a 1.5 minute cooldown that has a lot of functionality, and we're going to go through all of it right now. On a basic level, it increases your maximum health by 30% and increases all healing and absorbs received by 40% for 14 seconds. That is quite an amount of time to have all of that extra healing and health. However, you're going to cool it down due to Red Thirst. Every 10 runic power you spend reduces the cooldown by 2 seconds, so you're frequently getting 6 to 8 seconds off of this cooldown whenever you Death Strike. This is a really big deal, and it means that you can use the move in sometimes as fast as 30 seconds, as opposed to its normal 1.5 minute cooldown. So on its own, that's already pretty powerful, and if you want to know the easiest advice to tell a healer, it's that if Vampiric Blood is running, you're way easier to heal, and that's a good thing for them to know. But we also need to talk about the most disgusting talent here, called Umbilicus Eternus. Whoever named that, I hate it. After Vampiric Blood expires, you absorb damage equal to 5 times the damage your Blood Plague dealt during Vampiric Blood. Note that that's your Blood Plague, not your Death Strike or anything else. However, that does mean if Dancing Rune Weapon's running, you can get a massive absorb shield. So let's show you what that looks like real quick. I'll run up, I'll Dancing Rune Weapon, let's get a bazillion blood plagues on targets, and I'm going to do a bunch of damage. Don't worry about all the buttons I'm pressing. I hit Vamp Blood. We got all rolling here, okay, and it's almost up. Let's see the shield. Ooh, almost 1,000,000. I very frequently get 1,000,000. This does scale with the amount of enemies, so if you're in a single target boss fight, the Umbilicus Eternus shield isn't going to be very big, but this shield is massive and it sticks around for a couple of seconds. It's really powerful. So how do you use it? I think if you're giga-brained, you can set up your Umbilicus Eternus 14 seconds out from a major damage event and use the shield to keep you alive, but that's a little risky and I don't think the best use case of it. What I like to do is I use Vamp Blood to stay alive and to keep myself rolling. It's a major defensive and it works brilliantly in your favor to keeping you up and running. But when it ends, you're going to get the shield, and because you probably have blood plagues running, use that shield to really generate runic power. It's going to buy you some safety net, some time to make sure that you get your resources online, all your ducks in a row, and that you're good for when it falls off inevitably and you're back to taking damage on the face. So just keep in mind when it's about to run out that, yeah, you're only going to have a couple of hits left in you before the shield goes away. I know that sounds kind of funny, but you're taking so much damage on this spec sometimes that like 1,000,000 damage shield might go away in a couple of seconds. It's a little spooky. But use that time very effectively and you'll be rewarded greatly by keeping you rolling for very large periods of time. So send Vamp Blood often, but don't just send it willy-nilly. Really try to be like, hey, you know what? I want a big shield for this. Or you know what? I'm setting up a giant pull. I'm going to start that pull with Vampiric Blood and I'm going to get a lot of blood plagues rolling so that I have a shield to help keep me alive before I hit Dancing Rune Weapon. That's totally fine. Okay, we're about to be able to send you off to press buttons or stick around to learn about hero talents and all of the other cool buttons we have. However, You are not allowed to leave yet. This is way too important. We have something called rune forging. We can apply enchants to our weapon that are way more powerful than enchants anywhere else in the game. We're going to be giving you one that you want to use today, although depending on what you play, you might be swapping around which ones you use. Unholy, for instance, uses Apocalypse. We're going to be using Sanguination, but every time you get a new weapon, you have to do this. So use your Death's Gate, which is a 1-minute cooldown, to open up a little portal. You can then go to the Necropolis. You're going to go to the Legion version of the Necropolis, and I'm showing you all of this so that if you're brand new, you don't have to look up a guide for this. I could just show you what it looks like, but you'll spawn right here. You can walk in, and there's a ton of stuff to explore here. Feel free to run around and talk to people, but I like to jump this railing, touch this eyeball, you warp downstairs, and then down here there's a little training area. None of these are very helpful. They're all like level 45, except for this one that's level 90. I don't know. It's useful. It's a tanking dummy, but whatever. Anyway, here's a rune forge. Once you're near a rune forge, you may now enchant your weapon. So I always recommend Sanguination. Sanguination's really good for blood DK right now. This might change in future expansions or future patches, but what I like about this one is that it makes your Death Strike deal more damage based on a target's missing health. This means that you can do more healing, and you can do kind of execute damage on a low health target. Furthermore, when you fall below 35% health, you will heal for 58% of your maximum health over 8 seconds. I want to say this has a 3-minute cooldown. It might be a 2-minute cooldown. But Rune Sanguination is an unbelievably powerful effect, and while there are setups that do more damage with other ones in Raid, I think Sanguination is such a safe pick that if you just wanted to put it on and never think about it again, I don't think anyone would blame you. Once you're done in here and you're all good and you got what you need, just press Death's Gate again. This will teleport you back to where you were. If it can't put you where you were, it puts you near where you were. And if it can't put you anywhere near, I think it teleports you to a graveyard. I don't think I've ever had that happen to me. And I don't even know if it does that. But I'm almost positive the backup is a graveyard nearby. But yeah, it puts me right back where I was. No problem whatsoever. We're back in Dornegal. In conclusion, make sure you rune forge your weapon every single time you get it. But if you want to go run and press buttons in Time Walking or in Delves or something, be my guest, have some fun. But we're going to go through a quick overview of the hero talents and then all of our defensives and all of our utility. There's a lot to talk about here, so buckle up. I'm going to go over both the hero talents, and I do have 2 builds down below that you can use. However, I'm going to recommend Deathbringer. Deathbringer is just a little bit safer and easier to use. I didn't go into Permafrost, but your auto attacks give you an absorb shield equal to 80% of the damage dealt. Well, this is now increased a significant amount, so you get even more from that effect. But then also, spending runes gives you 1.5% reduced magic damage, and then regenerating runes gives you 1.5% physical resistance, and it stacks for 5 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times. So this means by spending runes, you're going to live just a little bit better, and I just think when you combine this all together, it's very easy to use. Also, Deathbringer provides you... where is it? I always can't find it. This talent in your hero tree says when you press your new fancy button, you're going to get 3 charges of Bone Shield. This makes your life so much easier for keeping your bone shields running while you're learning, which is again why I think Deathbringer is a really good beginner one. But if you love the idea of Sonland, play it. I'm going to go over it in a second here in very brief detail, but you really can play it in a lot of content. It's not that much squishier, but it also introduces a new button. But let's talk. Reaper's Mark is a 30-second cooldown with the Wayward Talented, and it does like a million things. If you want to stop the video and read it, you can, but I'm just going to walk you through it. First things first, it's going to apply a Reaper's Mark to the target. As you do shadow damage or frost damage to the target, you'll stack up its mark. When it hits 40, it'll explode, dealing damage based on how much it stacked up. And regardless of if the target died or it lived with the mark or you stacked it up all the way or you barely did anything with it, you get a nice cool powered up Marrow Rend, and it's going to spawn a Scythe. The Scythe will hit single target, then AoE. It's ultra satisfying. So when you press this button, you'll send out a wave of ice. This is a Frost DK move if I'm to believe what I'm told. It's very cool. It hits all the targets. It does a lot of damage, so just be wary of your aiming position when you press Reaper's Mark, and then eventually it explodes, dealing damage. Now we have a powered up Marrow Rend, and as you can see, it goes swing, swing, dealing a lot of damage, applying blood plagues, and you'll get 2 of them even. Very cool stuff. Whenever you see Marrow Rend whenever you see it glowing, it's a very important time to press the button. It'll do a lot of damage. It'll fold your laundry. It's great. That being said, we want to stack it by doing shadow or frost damage. So our Blood Boil is Shadow Frost damage while we're in the spec, and our Death and Decay does Shadow damage. I like to drop a Death and Decay, run up, hit Reaper's Mark, then drop another Death and Decay, then hit my Blood Boils. And this is going to stack the mark up really quickly, and it'll do a lot of damage when it explodes here. And then, of course, we still get that Empowered Scythe. And the Scythe, I don't believe, changes at all, depending on the stacks. Now, this also does more damage based on the target's missing health. So if you want to use it at a low health target, you can. And if the target dies, the mark will jump to a new target and continue stacking. So you're not going to lose its benefit. And if you use it right before a mob dies, well, you will lose the explosion on it. If the mob dies, you still get the Scythe attack that goes on Marrow Rend, which is really nice. So maybe at the end of a pull, you tag something with Reaper's Mark. It doesn't do its job, whatever, but you get the new move. Hey, that could be really nice for setting up a big pull, making sure you get a ton of threat on that target. So it's pretty easy to use. I recommend reading through all of the hero talents if you would like, and I think you should. Also, whenever you're learning a spec, I think it's a good idea to go through the spellbook, go through the talents, and kind of read everything again, because as you learn it and you press your buttons, you're going to want to remember, like, hey, what did that? And a reminder, if you, like, type Death Strike into the search bar, everything that Death Strikes, or it says Death Strike in it, will pop up. Great for figuring out interactions and, like, kind of what's going on here. But Sonlan does give you an extra button in that most people are taking consumption on Sonlan. I'll explain how that works. But Sonlan says that when you Death Coil or Death Strike, you're not pressing Death Coil. Do you hear me? You're not pressing Death Coil. Don't do it. You press Death Strike, okay? Thank you. It has a 35% chance to make your next Heart Strike become a Vampire Strike. This gives you Essence of the Blood Queen, which stacks up to a total of 7 times, and it gives you Flat Haste, up to 7%. This is a really big deal, and there's a lot more modifiers going on here, and I highly recommend that you read through them. But you can keep this buff rolling forever. So let me get everything rolling real quick. So let's see if we get a Vamp Strike. We got a Vamp Strike. Vamp Strike, big damage. But now we have Essence of the Blood Queen. That's good, because we want to keep rolling that for as long as possible. So anytime you see Vampire Strike pop up, just press it. Oh, we got another one. Okay, we're at 2 stacks. During Dancing Rune Weapon, you will only be able to Vamp Strike instead of Heart Strike. So you can press this to your heart's content, weave in your other attacks, but get all the way up to that 7 stacks, if you can, of Essence of the Blood Queen. Right, now you're going to hold that for as long as possible, refreshing it between pulls, always trying to do your best to get another Vamp Strike to do more damage. So that's how it works. Keep it rolling. Now, when you have all these blood plagues on targets, consumption will eat them. The more you charge it, the more it will eat. And as you charge, you gain more defensiveness, so you can survive more and more hits. Charge it up, and then it'll rip. Now, you can move during that animation, and if you cancel the animation, you will lose the cooldown of the move. So just be wary of that. But Sonlan's very fun. It also has a talent that I pick here where your Icebound Fortitude is better, but based on your missing health. But more importantly, whenever you kill an enemy that has experience or honor, it reduces the cooldown of Iceborne Fortitude by 3 seconds, which is high-key super useful. But I think Deathbringer is the way to go for new players. It's my preferred way to play. It's a little bulkier, but Sonlan's just fine, and it's not so less bulky that you can't run it. And honestly, some people might prefer Sonlan, and when you look at the leaderboards, you will see top players running both Sonlan and Deathbringer. So I think the answer is right now, go to town and pick which one you like more. All right, now it's time to go over all of our defensives. We already went over Vamp Blood, so I'm not going to be going over that one again. Let's start with Anti-Magic Shell. This is a short 40-second cooldown, and for 7 seconds, you absorb magic damage. It's only magic damage, so it won't stop you getting punched in the face. However, you do get runic power based on damage absorbed, and furthermore, magical effects will not be applied to you. There are entire tank busters, like Magister's Terrace Final Boss, where it'll go to apply the tank buster, but if AMS is running, it'll simply fall off of you. You will take 0 damage sometimes. It's extraordinarily funny. Anti-Magic Shell has a lot of interactions, so you'll be pressing it all the time just to see if it works on something new today. Now, you're going to get this confused. This is Anti-Magic Zone. This is, with the way we talent typically, a 3-minute cooldown that for 8 seconds reduces magic damage taken by the party or raid members by 15%. It's a zone AoE. It's incredibly useful. Put this over you and your healer, you'll save a life. Some people think it's an attack and they run out of it, which is really funny. However, it's a great move. Make sure you keep it handy for keeping yourself alive or for keeping your team alive during a major damage event. But just know it does absolutely nothing if there's no physical or magical component to the attack. If it's physical, the bubble will just sit there and vibe. So just keep that in mind. Lichborn isn't really a defensive, but this is the best place to talk about it. It is a 1 minute cooldown, and for 12 seconds, you're immune to charm, fear, and sleep, and note that it will also pull you out of those effects. So if you get feared in a dungeon, you can pop Lichborn and ta-da, you're not feared anymore. And if a fear goes off while Lichborn is running, it simply will not apply to you. But it gives you 6% leech, which is like, it's fine. Like, it's not the best thing, but if you ever want just a little bit more healing, you don't really want to commit a bigger cooldown, just pop a Lichborn. It's not like 6% leech is harming you. It's actually quite a lot of extra healing. So not a bad thing. Just keep it in mind. Icebound Fortitude, we mentioned it earlier, 30% DR for 8 seconds. It's only so good. 2 minute cooldown, immune to stun effects. So if you are stunned, you can use Icebound Fortitude to break out of most stuns, and it'll avoid certain stuns by just having it already running. Incredibly useful move, but you're going to want to save it for emergencies or use it at the start of a pull where you need some help setting up and you know you can afford to spend it and don't need it for the next 2 minutes. So just be advised, Icebound Fortitude's a pretty big deal, so you're going to want to use it very effectively, and wasting this cooldown feels terrible when you know you could have used it in a better spot. And there are dungeons where I don't even press it because I never felt threatened, so I like to use it as an emergency cooldown. Alright, Death Pact. Not every single player takes Death Pact. I have it in your beginner builds because I think it's really useful. At a 1.5 minute cooldown, you heal yourself for 50% of your health bar, but you get a heal absorb on you for 30% of your maximum health for 50 seconds. But because you also receive 50% increased healing while it is running, you're going to hit Death Strike and probably remove the whole damn thing. But it's OGCD, so you can be in the middle of an action, watch this, on my bars, 1, 2, and you can pop that heal. And then you can see how fast I heal off this absorb. Wow, it's almost gone. So Death Pact is a nice emergency button to kind of be like, oh, I'm very worried about dying. You pop it, you live just a little bit longer. Especially if you're using it during, like, say, Vampiric Blood, you're going to get it off of you so quick, you might not even notice the heal absorb on you. And if a healer tries to assist you with the heal absorb, thankfully, you'll be receiving more healing, so that won't be a hard thing to deal with whatsoever. Now, this isn't a defensive, but I want to talk about it right now. Raise Ally. It does cost 30 runic power. It's instant. It's a 10-minute cooldown if you're not in a dungeon. If you're in a dungeon, it uses the universal, like, kind of respawn timer or, like, extra life battle res timer. However, you'll put someone to 60% HP and at least 20% mana. Raise Ally, very strong effect. They'll be transparent after you res them, which is kind of cool, but just note that it does cost 30 runic power, so you do have to build into it, but a lot of the times that's pretty manageable. If the going gets rough, you might not be able to go for your Raise Ally immediately, and that can be a little dicey, but just 30 runic power is not too bad, so just keep in mind you have a battle res. Alright, first things first, Mind Freeze. This is an interrupt with a 15-yard range. And to add to the magic of this move, it's not only a 5-second interrupt in PvE content, but you'll reduce its cooldown by 3 whole seconds if you successfully interrupt an attack, and you'll grant 10 runic power, which is, what, a third or a fourth of a Death Strike? That's not bad at all. So we really like our kick. It's a good kick. Use it often to stop spell casts. Blinding Sleet is a 1-minute cone in front of you that'll disorient targets, and then afterwards they'll be slowed. The real trick to this is that it's great at stopping lots of spell casts. So let's say there's like a million enemies targeting your teammates. You just need a moment to breathe. You pop Blinding Sleet and you'll disorient them really quickly. They'll be knocked out of it immediately and casting a moment later, but Blinding Sleet will save the day. And at a 1-minute cooldown, feel free to just send this if you need one more stop. All right, Death Grip. This is a grip. It's a 15-yard range. It taunts the target on Blood DK. So if you're Blood DK, it taunts. If you're Unholy, it does not taunt. But it grips them to you. Now, note, it grips them to a spot right in front of you, and if you would like to grip the target again, just make sure you move a little bit so that the spot updates, otherwise it won't let the grip work. But yeah, you grip things. That's a really good way to stop spellcast, organize mobs, deal with, like, enemies fixated on your teammates. You can kind of save their life and bring them back to you. I do this a lot on Skyreach's third boss. I find it very useful there. So use grip and use grip often. However, if you do need an extra taunt, it is good as an extra additional taunt. It makes keeping threat a lot easier in single target or on a rogue enemy that's taking a little too much damage from one of your teammates. Like they're taking, I meant rogue as in like they're not behaving and they end up getting threat by your teammate. You can just kind of grip them and be like, no, you're mine, and kind of fix the issue. You have 2 mass grips as Death Knight. You have Gorfiend's Grasp and Abomination Limb. Most often, Gorfiend's Grasp is better, and I'll explain why. It's also a shorter cooldown, but both of these are totally viable, and we'll go through them. Gorfiends are going to grab all the enemies in the 15-yard range of the target that you pick and pull them to them instantaneously. It'll silence them for 3 seconds, which is a really big deal. The silence is very useful. Great for stopping lots of enemy spellcasts and actually interrupting them. But note that this can't be used on allies or the enemy that you're grabbing. So it doesn't immediately bring them to you, it brings them to whatever you're targeting. So you can completely whiff enemies by Gorfiending something that's out of range of all the other enemies in the area, and it's useless. Just keep an eye on where you place this. Abomination Limb happens around you, and anything further than 8 yards from you gets grabbed every 1 second. This is a really, really fun ability, but a mob can only be pulled once every 4 seconds, so you do need to keep moving in order to keep like stopping enemy spellcasts. It doesn't interrupt, it is just a stop and grips them for you. But what makes that so much fun is that, and when it's good, Abomination Limb is crazy strong and like continuously stops enemy attacks while you continuously reposition and cause problems. But a lot of the times I recommend using Gorfiend, as I think it is just strictly better in most scenarios, especially when pugging. But in raid, Abomination Limb might be exactly what the doctor ordered, because you can just pop this and things just get gripped towards you from a million miles away. Very useful, very handy. Also, it's a little hard to see under your feet when you run Abomination Limb, so just be mindful. The floor under you might be extremely deadly, and you won't see it. Again, another rite of passage moment. Just like forgetting to rune fort your weapon. I think that's a funny little Death Knight moment you'll probably have at some point. Now, we haven't talked about it too much, but Death's Advance is your only movement tool we're talented into in the beginner build. There is technically one other one called Wraith Walk, and you can go experiment with that if you want. But essentially, when you pop this, it's a 45-second recharge for 10 seconds. You're faster, 35% faster. Now, you are immune to forced movement effects and knockbacks like Dangerous Wind, which is extremely useful, but it's your only movement ability. Like you really aren't that fast as Death Knight, and it's a surprisingly long cooldown, so you're not going to get it up all that often. So just keep that in mind when you're playing Death Knight, that Death's Advance, while useful, you got to make sure you use it in the right spot. Sometimes you don't want to get knocked back by a tank buster, and Death's Advance is the best option for that. And if you already spent it a whole bunch running around the boss arena trying to go quick, you then can't stop the knockback. So just keep that in mind. There's also a lot of other cool things here that I didn't like fully get into. Like, for instance, Chains of Ice is a 1 rune 70% slow you can put on a target. Excellent when a fixated mob is running at your teammate and you want to just kind of slow them down and kind of make your teammate's life a little easier. There's also Path of Frost, which lets you walk on water and murder your teammates. By the way, if you want to not get murdered by your teammates whenever they Path of Frost, just aim directly down and hold forward, and when you land in the water, you'll instantly start swimming. That is a very useful tip. But please make sure to read the talents, make sure to look through everything as you get used to the spec. However, our final segment is a very important one, and it's one that I want everyone to really remember. How do healers help you? A lot of healers are going to ask, like, hey, Death Knight, how do I work with you? And I see a lot of Death Knight players that go like, oh, I don't know, just hope I don't die. And like, we can do better than that. So as a healer main, let me bestow on you all the knowledge I have about healers. First things first, 30% health is when a lot of your passives kick in and start healing you. So if you want to tell a healer to start healing you if you ever drop below 30%, that's not a bad idea. Also tell them to pay attention to your runic power bar. Roughly 1/3 of your runic power bar is a death strike. So if you're below 1/3 of your runic power and below 1/3 health, you are critical. You need assistance. You need a doctor. So they can keep an eye out for that, but your health bar will ping pong. So that's not always the full story. If Vamp Blood's running, you're going to receive additional healing. So if Vamp Blood's on you, they'll have an easier time healing you. They can get bigger shields on you and all of that. So that's another good piece of advice for your healer. But let's go through all the different healers and what they can do for you. All right, my favorite healer, Preservation Evoker, is the best tank healer in the game. They have an external defensive that provides you a 50% damage reduction, and the 50% damage that's reduced turns into a stagger effect, so it happens over time to you rather than immediately. This means that Death Knight can heal themselves up from the damage they would have taken over time, which is extremely useful. Turns out turning anyone else into a monk other than a monk is really powerful. Brewmaster is broken for a reason, and I can't believe it's an external defensive. So if Prez gives you that, you're going to be able to live forever. But also, Reversion, their heal over time, has an effect on it called Golden Hour. 15% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds is healed back instantly. And they can do this to you twice in 1 moment with Echo Reversion. You need to understand you take so much damage within 5 seconds that there's a lot of times your health will go low and a Prez player will just hit Reversion on you and you'll suddenly be at full HP again. I've hit some of the craziest heal numbers in my life by hitting a Reversion, so just keep that in mind. Preservation's a really, really good tank healer, and even when they're just stuck doing single target heals to you, it really isn't the end of the world. They're really good at helping assist keep you alive a little bit longer, so I think Prez is your best healer combo if you need to stay alive, but every healer can help out a DK, and remember, most of this is on you anyway. So, Holy Priest, I highly recommend Guardian Angel, especially if they have 1 minute Guardian Angel. Great for helping keep the tank alive. Also, just drop a Serenity on your tank when they're below 30% HP and stop thinking about them. Also, if they need to run for their life, you can always be gripped by your Priest back into like safety, and you can slow enemies with Death and Decay. That's a strategy you can employ as well. Disc can do that as well. However, Disc is not the best tank healer. So my biggest recommendation here is Pain Suppression. A 40% DR is really powerful on you. So yeah, give them a 40% DR and you'll go to town with it as a Blood DK. Resto Shaman, also not the best healer in the world at healing tanks. However, for Blood DK, they do have a few niches, and one of which is Spirit Link Totem. Either the Spirit Link Totem goes down and you are healing the party with your healing, which is crazy, or the whole party's healing you. Either way, Spirit Link Totem does a lot of work for DK and essentially extending your health pool. And while that can be a little dangerous in time walking, in normal endgame content, it's really powerful. If the Resto Shaman is talented into Riptide provides bonus stamina, which I think they still have, that is a really, really good talent on Blood DK because you benefit so much from the bonus stamina that can really help keep you alive. So let's say you hit that 30% health threshold, you're starting to die. If they open with a Riptide, you're going to be in good hands for a little bit. It's not the best, but it's certainly not the worst. It's a very workable healing environment. Resto Druid does have a hard time healing you if you're not fully ramped. My recommendation is tell them to put a Life Bloom and a Rejuve on you and call it a day. But if a Blood DK is about to die and you really need to keep them alive, you have to do a full ramp. That means you need to have the Life Bloom on them, the Rejuve on them, and then you start regrowth spamming and swift mending as needed. However, and maybe even a wild growth just to really add to your mastery, right? But like fully ramping a DK or even just getting a couple of heal over times on them is usually enough that like they can work with that because they're taking damage all the time. It's hard to spot heal them, so having the heal over time on them is helping with their blood plagues, and it just puts in a lot of groundwork. So Resto Druid, not the best option, but not the worst. And they also have Iron Bark that they can provide you as well, small external defensive. So they usually have a way to assist you when the going gets rough, but I wouldn't overly rely on them to be able to instantly fix you like, say, Prez can. Holy Paladin actually is better than you might think. Blessing a Sacrifice is a bit of a roller coaster ride because you take so much damage, the Pally's going to really feel it when they give you Blessing a Sacrifice, but that is an option they have. 3% Devotion Aura, right? They're always giving you 3% damage reduction. That in its own right's good. A Lay on Hands is incredible. It's a full heal, essentially, right? So you'll just be healed to full in a moment's notice. That's never bad. But realistically, the Apex talent is going to do a lot of work for them. They get a beacon that goes on the lowest health target, and they do have a way to move it around, I believe, as well. I think it's Holy Light. But if you just have the Apex beacon on you, you're receiving bonus healing. So they can actually throw a couple of heals into you when you are the lowest health target, and they'll actually heal you up faster than other specs will. At least faster than you might expect. The Infusion of Light, Flash of Light heals are also really good on you when you're low on health, but typically speaking, they don't have the best tools, but they don't have the worst tools. Holy Paladin's pretty decent at getting your back, and realistically, again, you're responsible for a lot of your own health bars, so this isn't the end of the world. Mistweaver's actually really funny. Because of Mistline, they're going to be healing you a decent amount in the background when you're the only person getting hurt, but Fist Weaving is pretty useful at healing you and topping you off, etc, etc. But when the going gets rough, they should bubble you. Bubble provides Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist, which are both of their healing amplifiers, so that's going to help them keep you alive. Furthermore, Soothing Mist is one of the best heals in the game. Going Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, Vivify spam while inside the Soothing Mist channel is a ton of healing, and it's some of the best single target healing and sustained single target healing the entire game has to offer. So it's not great if your Mistweaver has to stay on you for long periods of time. However, a quick bubble and a quick heal might be all you need, And if it's truly a disaster, they can hit that Soothing Mist and start spamming and burning their mana bar alive to keep you up. Again, it's not a sustainable solution, and no tank should be being babysit by their healer. That turns into a problem for the healer, which turns into a problem for the party. But Mistweaver does have the tools to keep you running, and they can also like Ring of Peace you and like kind of knock away the smaller enemies, giving you a moment to breathe. That's never bad either. But that is going to do it for this one. Please have a ton of fun with Blood Death Knight. I think it's a really, really enjoyable tank. It's got a lot of cool tools, and I think the class fantasy combined with the power fantasy is kind of next level. There aren't a lot of tanks like this in other games, and I think it's just such a fun fantasy to be able to play in a video game. So if you have any questions, let me know down below. Of course, please feel free to cross references with other guides and other content creators, and of course check out logs to go see what top players are doing. But Blood is sick. It's a little challenging, but I don't think the difficulty curve's too hard, and I think it's so much fun. Once it clicks, I think you'll love it as much as I do. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.